We're going to talk about personal organization. That's what this is, 6 principles for organizing your life. So if you didn't want to hear about personal organization, then you're in the wrong place. Uh, I told Zach, I was like, I feel like the modern evangelism workshop is way more spiritual than personal organization, but personal organization is important. So I'm glad that you guys are here for this. So Tyler asked me to do this workshop. So what I want to do is I just kind of wanted to see like who's here. So and what your needs are. There's no way that in an hour together I'm going to be able to give you a full-on organizational system that you then take and adopt and bring into your life tomorrow. But what I want to do is I want to give you 6 principles that have helped me design and redesign hundreds of times my organizational system for how I stay on track and how I get things done. And hopefully some of these principles will be helpful to you. So how many of you guys are in full-time ministry right now? Is there anybody? You're on paid staff, okay, full-time ministry. How many of you are leading the ministry that you're involved in, okay? How many of you are bivocational? You're working, you're also, okay. All right, so organization. The need for organization. I feel like I shouldn't have to spend a lot of time talking about what the need is for being organized. It's not like you're going to see in the Bible, some kind of like big exhortation, like here's a whole chapter, Colossians chapter 5, all about organization or something like that. But you do see certain gifts that are clearly operated by people who have organizational skill. The gift of leadership has oftentimes a gift of organization. There's a gift of administrations mentioned in the book of 1 Corinthians that is borrows from the idea of the person at the rudder of the ship kind of navigating everything. So that's an organized kind of person. But to me, the need for organization is real simple. There's so much to do for Jesus. There's so many things vying for our attention to keep us from doing those things for Jesus. So we must be fairly organized so that we do the right things and spend our lives in the right way. So the need to me is obvious. The dangers, though, in a talk like this are pretty simple. What we don't want to do is we don't want to become people who fall in love with our organization, who fall in love with our systems, who aren't flexible anymore to minister to people, stuff like that. Sometimes people think that that's what will happen, though, if you become an organized person, that you are going to be somehow unavailable to the work of the Lord. My youth pastor and I were talking on the way down here. We drove down yesterday, and he said, I'd heard for years about people who schedule their lives the way that you do, Nate. I'd heard about them, but I'd never seen one live, up close and personal. My calendar from 5 a.m. till the time I go to bed at night is accounted for. I like to schedule everything out that I'm doing. It can make me sound like I'm inflexible, and to be honest, sometimes I do deal with that. My daughter, who I mentioned earlier, who's in college, she actually told me recently, she's like, Dad, I think you might be a little bit autistic. So that's possible. That might be something I have going on in my life. But what I've found is it helps me to actually be available, to be planned out and organized, because I know what needs to shift around when an emergency arises. And I know how to kind of replan what I've already put together and what I've already planned. So let me start and just get into these 6 principles with you guys today, and then I'll open it up for some questions that you guys might have to help you with maybe a practical issue or need that you're dealing with right now. Okay, so principle number 1 is I'd encourage you to be goal and role oriented. Be goal and role oriented. What I mean by that is that it's whatever system you're designing, whatever decisions you're making, you want them to flow from who you are made and called to be. When I was 18 years old, I was in Bible college. I was 3 months out or 2 months out of the world and had been sober for about a month. And I had been taking a class on the Holy Spirit. I was just there to get clean. and learn about Jesus and then move on to the rest of my life. And one night I was studying, and I sensed more powerfully than I've probably ever sensed since then an impression that I was not called to other things, but I was called to teach the Word. So that for me was a big, like, we all have these pillar moments or like foundational elements that help define or describe this is who I am. So for me, that's one of those things. Like, I need to be a Bible teacher. I need to be, so what does that say? That says I need to be scheduling in time to study. I need to be a reader. I need to be thoughtful. I need to have time to prepare teachings. If I'm going to do, if that's the role that God has given to me, if that's the design that He has for my life, then it better be reflected in the way that I organize my life. Otherwise, all we're doing is wishing for things. We don't want to be a merely wishful people. We want to be a people who are building the lives that God has called us to build. So think about the goals that you have that are from God, the roles that God has given to you, and you want to build your calendar, your to-do list, your projects list based on those things that you know that God has designed for you to be. So you can do this in a few different ways. One thing you can do is you can just ask the question, what are my key relationships that I'm in? So for instance, as a pastor, I can say, okay, well, I'm a pastor of a local church. That's one thing. I'm a father of 3 daughters. I'm a husband to, as Paul said of Timothy, 1 wife. I'm a friend. So I think about these different roles, and I think about their importance. And okay, so I want my schedule, life, task list, project list, all of that to reflect who I am. And then the roles. Okay, I'm a pastor, but what are the roles that I have as a pastor? Well, in my context, I am called to be the leader of our church. So that means I'm leading a team of people. I am also the main teacher, so that means I have to schedule that into my life. So you get what I'm saying. You want to think about, what are my roles? What are the goals that I have in my life? When it comes to the goal thing, that might be a little more like long term. Like for me, a goal was I want to be able to write Bible studies for people to be able to resource all over the world in whether online or in print or whatever. And so that was a goal of mine. That just takes like time and energy and like thought and organization to get there. But these things don't just magically happen, is what I'm trying to say. You've got to schedule them into your life, but you start with, what's the vision that I have? What's the role that I'm called to? What is the goal that God has given to me? Growing up in a pastor's home, for me, unfortunately, a big part of my story is that after watching my father, and he's still serving as a pastor. He's a great guy. Some of you might have even heard some of his teaching over the years. But after 27 years of marriage, my parents' marriage disintegrated when I was in my mid-20s. And looking back, I realized, okay, and I kind of knew intuitively, like their marriage wasn't super. It was, they had highs and lows, but it was never robust, and it was definitely not one that I looked at and thought, that's what I want in the future. I knew I wanted something different. I wanted things to be different in whatever home God might give to me. But for me, that's like, okay, that's a role that God has given to me, so I need to design backwards. So like for years, this is just an example. For years, my wife and I, we would get together each year, and we'd take a whole day to just plan our next year of life together. Not just calendar-wise, but what we would do is ask big questions, like, how are we doing? What do we need to work on? How are each one of our kids doing? What are some goals for them for this next year? And you're just, because you're saying, I want to be a good parent, or I want to be a good husband, you're saying, this is going to be reflected in the way that I plan and prepare. But again, if you don't start with, what do I want to be? Where am I going? All of that, then you just won't plan in that way. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Whatever system you adopt, whatever thing you do, I want you to be role and goal oriented. There's a book out there that This is my introduction into the world of organization. Basically, what happened to me was I was a youth pastor for many years, and a young adult pastor for many years, and I did all the things that you can do in a church, the janitor stuff and painting the building, maintenance, all those different things, missions pastor, all of that. And I just was kind of like going. And before I had kids, I just was like, yeah, I'll just rock a 70-hour week. This is fun, I just like do stuff like that. I remember after I worked for the church for 2.5 years, one of the assistant pastors went to my father, who was the lead pastor at that time, and he said, I really think that you should let Nate have a day off. Like, I didn't have a day off ever. Any day of the week, I just worked 7 days a week and like 5 nights a week. And my dad laughed and said, Nate doesn't want a day off. And my friend was like, no, I'm pretty sure he does want a day off. So then my dad asked me, would you want a day off? And after 2.5 years, I was like, I would like to have one day where I don't have to come to work. But for me, I would just go. And then this thing happened to me when I was 27, where my father left, and we got a new pastor, and that new pastor wanted me to be basically his like right-hand man, his executive pastor, his administrative pastor. I didn't know how to administrate everything. So I would be in meetings and I would write down everything that I needed to do. I had this huge binder. And then I would come to work and I would just rifle through that binder, trying not to forget the most important things. I was so stressed out. I had sticky notes everywhere. I thought I was dropping balls all the time. I just was real panicked. And then this one day, a friend of mine said, hey, let's grab lunch. And he ran a real successful chiropractic business. And he just started telling me about this book called Getting Things Done by a guy named David Allen. And he told me about the book at lunch and gave me like some CD lectures from the guy. By the end of the night, by the time I went to bed, I had read the whole book and listened to all the lectures, and the next day was implementing this system. And it was like, this saved my life, because I was forgetting things. I was failing in what I was doing because I wasn't planned and prepared. But the thing is, if you fall in love with that kind of thing without knowing where you're going first, then you're going to make the wrong decisions of what you need to get done. So first start with your goal and your role. And if a lot of you guys, I can tell you're younger, you're still figuring out, like, who am I? What has God designed for me? Who am I going to be in Christ? This is something you pray about. This is something you talk to the Lord about. This is something you talk with leaders about, trusted mentors in your life, that you kind of take time to think about, like, what are my core passions and desires? Sometimes you need people to help bounce those ideas off of you, because I guarantee you, the things you're passionate for, they're things that you think everybody's like that, but they're not. It's something unique to you, and sometimes you need other people to help point those things out. So be goal and role oriented. Number 2, I would say this is a second major principle. You then need to do the important things. This might sound a little bit redundant, but once you figure out, this is who I am, this is what God has called me to be, then you got to do the things that are most important to that end. Here's why I'm saying this. I read this book recently called, I forget how many hours it is. It's not 10,000 hours. It's like 30-something thousand days or something like that. But it's basically about the span of a human life, and how so much of the material that's out there now about organization and planning and preparation, the idea is there are all these things to get done. How will you get them all done? Adopt this system. And that's kind of the idea of the book, Getting Things Done. There's all these things you have to get done. How can you get them all done? Adopt this system. But the premise of this book by, I think, a guy named Walter Brueggemann, but he basically says, you're not going to get it all done. That's the thing we kind of have to, we're kind of in an information overload age. It's just not possible. We're not going to be able to do everything that there is to do. So what I'm saying to you is, when you identify those key roles and goals in your life, then identify what are the key and most important habits and things that I must do to get those things done. And then that is what you put in your calendar, and they become the non-negotiables of your life. So like I said, for me, I'm a Bible teacher, and I I realized early on in ministry that studying to prepare teachings was going to be under constant attack in the work of the Lord, and that there'd be opportunities and emergencies and questions and pop-ins like, hey, quick question for you, kind of things. And when you're in the middle of like deep thought work, a quick question, it derails you for 45 minutes. So I started realizing like right away, like, okay, I have to really protect this time. So when I was a youth pastor and I was, on someone else's dime, and I, had a boss and all of that, I knew I had certain hours that I had to be available. So I was, early in the morning, 5 a.m. Okay, this is my sermon prep time because I can't do this at the church offices. Or I found, like, I remember this one phase, I found a stairwell in our church building, and I found a black stage curtain, and I put it over the stairwell so that you couldn't see that there was like a space under there. And I found this teeny little desk and brought a little lamp in there, and that would be my like little hidey hole. I just would go in there and I'm just studying, getting into the Word, because I knew this is a very important thing that must be protected in my life. I read years ago a pastor named W.A. Criswell. He pastored First Baptist Dallas for 50 years. And one of the things he said in his book on ministry, he said, I give my mornings to God, my afternoons to the church, and my evenings to the family. And what he meant by that was, I spend the first half of the day in my personal time with the Lord and then in study. I spend the second half of my work day dealing with church administration and leadership and all that kind of stuff. And then I spend my evenings either with my church family, ministering to them, or my family, ministering to them. That's how I organize my life. And when I read that, I thought, that makes sense. I'm called to preach the word, and so I'm going to put that into my calendar. The morning time is time where I'm pouring into the word. That's an example of doing the most important things. I remember reading when I was in youth ministry a book called The Next Generation Leader, and one of the things that the author said was that he introduced me to the concept of what's called the 80-20 principle. And the 80-20 principle basically says that you are going to get 80% of the results or fruit that you're going to experience from about 20% of your energy, and you're going to get 20% of your fruit and byproduct from about 80% of your energy. So the goal is to figure out, where am I getting 80% of my fruit, and try to do more of the work that leads to all of that fruit. And I realized real quickly as a pastor, for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm getting lots of fruit from the teaching aspect, so I need to pour into that because I'm getting big results from that effort. So identifying that and then calendaring it and being all about it. There's a rhythm of organization or planning called time block planning. Cal Newport, who's an author that I would totally recommend if you want to get into organization. If any of the things I'm talking about sound like, yeah, I'm vibing with that, I want to kind of design my life that way. Cal Newport, he's not a Christian, but he's a computer science professor at Georgetown. But he's written a number of books that really helped me figure out my philosophy of how I was going to organize and structure my life. He wrote a book called Deep Work, which really resonated with me because it helped me realize that so much of what a creative is doing is a kind of work that requires like lack of distraction and strong concentration for periods of time. And that's where he came up with the concept of time blocking. You're blocking out time for this specific task. So you've heard of multitasking before. I think that multitasking is a total myth, that it's not real. Nobody's really multitasking. You're working on one task at a time and distracting yourself from various tasks. I'd encourage you to be a monotasker. Find these big, massive, important things, block them into your calendar and life, and then do those things. So that's the second thing I'd say to you is do the important things. Number three, third thing that I think has really helped me over the years, be goal and role oriented, do the important things. But number three, this has been really huge, is to set boundaries. To set boundaries. And I want to talk about that for a second. As I said, I grew up in a ministry home. My dad was not just a pastor; he was a church planter, and so I saw firsthand how ministry can be like an all-consuming fire. And I'll never forget the moments where when our church was portable and I was growing up in it. I'll never forget the times where because we only had some offices that we rented from a Presbyterian church in town, and it was just their basement of their really old building. And because the basement was like, there was the street, and then there was this driveway that went down from the street level to the basement doors. Because that was the case, the water, when it would rain, it would flow down towards those doors. So there was a little drain in front of the door, and the drain had a pump that would then pump the water back up to the street to the gutter. But sometimes the power would go out, and so the pump would stop working, and someone would call my dad, the lead pastor, the man of God, to go down there and fix the pump to get the generator going and to get that water pumped out of there. And I'll never forget one night, it was like the middle of the night, it's pouring down rain, and I just was sitting there watching him in doing this, and I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way. This guy is doing everything that there is to do. And we would sit there at dinner time, and we couldn't get through a meal because the phone would be ringing, and people are calling, Pastor Bill, I need you. I need to talk with you. I need some counsel. And I just thought to myself, without being able to put words to it at that time, it just felt to me like there's got to be a way to have some boundaries in life and ministry that would help him stay focused so that he's not doing these things. And so I think boundaries are incredibly important. So when we first started out in full-time ministry, my wife and I, we had a big conversation about, all right, what is our boundary when it comes to how many nights each week on average we'll commit to serving in the church? Because, that it was kind of like we could be doing this 6 or 7 nights a week if we wanted to. I'm an inventive person. I'm like think about stuff and like to create things. So if I have no boundaries, I'll just be like inventing new discipleship ministries for every single night of the week, new opportunities, new outreaches, new things. And so I needed that. I needed that structure. And we talked about it in our family. We said, the general rule of thumb for us is going to be 3 nights a week as our rule. And then there will be seasons, we're sure, where we have to do 4 or 5 because it's just that's the season that we're in. But the general rule is going to be 3 nights a week out serving Jesus. And then we're going to have a date night each week that we spend together. That's been really important and vital to us in ministry. It's not like a big romantic thing. It's just more like, let's grab a bite to eat and let's make sure we have a space to catch up and look at each other and talk. And then we're going to have a couple of other nights where we just like either we're doing chores or we're just watching Netflix or we're just chilling or whatever, like because we just need to like be with friends. But that's what we're going to do. And that was a really important boundary for us to establish, a really important boundary for us to set. And so you're going to have to do things like that. I'll tell you though, there's one major area that I want to encourage all of you to have a boundary in. Some of you might be saying, well, I'm not even married. I don't have kids. I don't have to worry about like the nights of the week. I'll tell you one boundary that we all need to worry about is we need to set proper boundaries with our phones. That is a space that I think really can chew into so much ministry productiveness if we're not careful about our phones and the way that we set it up. So Cal Newport, the man I mentioned earlier, he wrote a book called Being a Digital Minimalist. And I'd encourage you to check out that book, especially if that's an issue for you. If you feel like, man, I just keep going back to my phone, I'm very distracted. For me, the way I have my phone set up, when I travel, I get everything unlocked so that if I need a hotel receipt or something like that, I can get it. But not really. I mean, I do have like the classic accountability software and all that. All of our pastors do. But for me, it's just more of like, I don't want to have Google in my pocket. I don't want to have the answers to all the questions. I don't want to have access to the internet in my pocket. So my phone, I just get it locked down where I have no web browser. Can't install a web browser without my wife like unlocking something and letting me have one for a couple of days. I don't want email on my phone. I definitely don't want email on my phone. I remember in 2008, I was an early adopter on the whole smartphone thing. I had one of the first iPhones, and I was a brand new pastor taking over this established church. And I remember one morning getting up and grabbing my phone and going to the bathroom and sitting there, and I opened up my email inbox on that first iPhone, and I had this long scathing email from this old woman in the church, and I just sat there thinking to myself, this is not the way I want to live my life. Not the way I want to live my life. There's a time for this and a place for this, and it's not here right now. And so I've been over the years always trying to hack away at that. So what I try to do is I try to make my phone into the device I want it to be. So what do I want it to be? Well, I want it to be able to take pictures. I want to be able to listen to podcasts. I want to be able to listen to books. I want to be able to read books when I'm out and about. And I want to have Spotify and be able to listen to music. I want to be able to communicate with family, stuff like this. So there's various apps that I'll have, but then there's so many things that I know are just mindless distractions 90% of the time for me. And so what I do is I cancel them, so that even though the 10% utility that I could get from them, I'm not going to get, and I'll have to go to a traditional computer to be able to access what I need, to me it's worth it in the long run. This is the mistake that we make with a lot of things. We say to ourselves, because there is some utility, I have to adopt this whole thing. You probably have seen this with like older relatives who just love Facebook so much. And you're like, you're just so addicted to this. You're a straight up addict to this. You're living your life vicariously through other people. But then when you talk to them, what is it? Well, there was this friend that I had in high school, and if it hadn't have been for Facebook, I wouldn't have connected with that person. What is that? It's a little bit of utility that is justifying a whole bunch of wasted life. So we have to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of believing that a little bit of utility justifies the price that we're paying for that utility. I'd rather do without some of the utility, have that boundary so that I can live the life that I believe that God has called me to be. So I'd encourage you to do that, to think about what are the boundaries I want to have with my phone, with social media. How do I want to live that life? I'm Gen X. I'm old enough to have gone through the various waves. So I grew up without social media. Then it all came out, and I went into it, just dove in head first, and was all about it. Oh, this is great. I can reach people, ministry, all of that. And I'm just at a stage in my life where it's like, if somebody else on our staff wants to run a social media for me, then they can do that, but I am not interested, So I'm that kind of person because I feel I have a purpose and a mission that's in front of me. So I think that's important to think about the boundaries that you might want to establish with your phone, with your schedule. So setting boundaries. Okay, here's the fourth one I want to share with you. And we're getting close to the end, and then I'll open it up for questions. A fourth one is, this might not sound like an organizational principle, but I would just say read a lot. Read a lot. And I think what I'm getting at with this is I haven't met very many people that say, I just want to read less. Most people I know, they say, I'd like to read more. I'd like to be more well-read. I know that there's books out there that would be really good for me. I'd like to read more. And for me, I think what I've discovered is if you can get a handle on installing this into your life, then it probably means you have a handle on organizing your life. So I would encourage you to be a reader. It helps you, but it's something that if you don't organize it into your life, it won't happen. I haven't always been a reader, but I don't know, for the last 5 or 6 years, I read 50 to 100 books in a year. Part of that is that it's my job. It's important that I be doing that. But through that, I've been able to help my mom. She's like, I think I want to read a dozen books a year. I'm like, yeah, Mom, that's great. You spend a lot of time on Facebook, like I just talked about. And it'd be great for you to read some books. It's good for the mind. There's some great concepts out there. I'd love to encourage you in that. But here's the thing. How do I do that? How can I read more books? Well, I have written an article. It's at nateholdridge.com called How to Read More Books. So there's like a bunch of suggestions there. But one of the things that I would say that is significant when it comes to reading more books is you have to plan what you're going to read next. If you don't know what you're going to read next when your current book is over with, that's where you stall out. Okay, that's one thing. You got to plan what you're going to read next. So for me, I always have 3 books that I'm reading. I have a fun book, that I'll either be listening to or reading. It could be Tolkien, it could be fiction. I like biographies, so like I'm 90s kid, so I just finished reading a biography on Charles Barkley, the basketball player, and before that I read a biography about the notorious B.I.G., the rapper, and before that it was, I forget who it was before that, but it's stuff that interests me. It's just like, cruising around. I could listen to a podcast or whatever, but I could also listen to this. So that's one thing. I always have a fun book that I'm into. A second one is I like to have a book that is spiritual, Christian, like oriented, but it's more like self-helpy, like it's for me personally, So it could have the Christian background. This would be like, even though where I'd put like the Cal Newport stuff, just like personal improvement, kind of category. And then the third category is just straight up like scriptural, spiritual, kind of stuff. So, and then for me, the having those 3 books kind of queued up, the other big important thing is to have a time each day where I read 10 pages. Okay, doesn't sound like a lot, but here's the thing. If you just commit to, here's 15 minutes of my day, and I'm going to read 10 pages, you're going to find this snowball effect that happens. A lot of times people think about reading and it's like, where am I going to find the time to sit down for 3 hours and read a book? It's really not about that. You just sit down for 10 minutes a day reading, 15 minutes a day reading. If that's all you did, over time, you'd be accumulating a stockpile of books that you had gotten through. So it just takes a willingness to put that in and say, this is like a non-negotiable part of my life. So I feel like this leads to, it's like a cornerstone kind of habit, a keystone habit that leads to a lot of other organizational stuff in a person's life. So that's why I throw that in there, read a lot. Okay, number 5, be goal-oriented, do the important things, set boundaries, read a lot. And then number 5, I would say constantly plan. Constantly plan. What do I mean by that? Well, what I'm always encouraging our staff at Calvary Monterey to do is don't let your inbox be your to-do list. In other words, like don't show up to your day or your work day, open up your computer and go, okay, here we go. I'm going into Gmail, inbox. What do I need to do today? I'm like, that's not the way you live your life. You plan what you're supposed to be doing this day, this week, this month, this year. And I encourage you to be constantly making a plan. So for me, I'm big on making a plan each year. Like this next year, here's some goals. Here's some things I want to do. Here's some stuff that I want to accomplish. Now, I might not get it all done, but I get a lot more done that way than if I had made no plan in the first place. So what kind of plans would go on there? Well, some of them could just be real personal in nature. Like one of my goals this year, you might say, I've never taken a real vacation, and I want to do that this year. Or I've never gone on a grown-up vacation on my own where I've bought a plane ticket and gone somewhere. I want to do that this year. Or maybe it's a physical thing. I want to be able to run 5 miles without dying. Kind of or something like that. It could be a goal like that. But it could also be a work goal, a ministry goal. I want to have taught through the book of Genesis, verse by verse, to my kids or something like that. It could be that kind of goal. It could be a discipleship goal. I'm going to start this group. My goal is to take 10 young men and take them through a curriculum that I've created and help them become, X. So it could be goals like that. But setting that annual goal. And then I think each week you need to kind of like reassess, like, how am I doing? What do I need to do this week? So for me, this is like a linchpin in my life. If I were to just do like one thing about personal organization, I would say this. Every single week, you need to set time to sit down and ask yourself the question, what am I going to do this next week? You just need to plan that out. What am I going to do this next week? It takes me about 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes to do this, usually on Sunday afternoons, to just kind of be sorting through. This is what the focus is going to be this next week. Another area to plan would be your finances. Everybody tells you to make a budget. Do that. Make a plan. But the reason that you have to constantly plan is because there's going to be times, just like in a financial budget, that you fail in the plan that you've made. It doesn't go exactly the way that you've planned, so you got to readjust, replan. All right, so constantly plan. This is really important in a family as your kids are growing, to ask the question, where are they at now? What do they need? Having a kid in college, it's like, man, that just doesn't happen on accident. You have to make some plans. And then the last thing that I would say, so constantly plan, the last thing I would say, and this might have been the reason that you came here in the first place, is to have a system. Have a system. This is the last thing I wanted to mention. So what does it mean to have a system? Let me give you some things that you're going to need to have in your organizational system. I don't know what it's going to look like for you, but you're going to have these elements. One thing that you're going to have is you're going to have inboxes in your system. Inboxes in your system. And what an inbox is this is where I capture and collect the things that I need to know and then act on in the future. All right, so what I'd encourage you to do is to try to streamline your inboxes to be as tight as possible. If you have like 7 note-keeping apps and 3 physical journals and 4 inbox baskets, like, you're never going to be able to keep up with everything that you write down. So try to condense it all. I try to have 1 digital inbox. I try to have 1 physical inbox. And then there is always the email inbox. That's just kind of its own separate beast. So for me, I just use Google Keep as my digital inbox. Anything that I need to remember and process at some point, I put into that Google Keep inbox. So when I'm doing my weekly review, one of the things that's there every week, process Google Keep. So I'll go through there. I remembered a sermon illustration, or I thought of a sermon illustration. There it is in Google Keep. I put it in my illustration file. Oh, I got to call this young girl back and make an appointment. I put that in my to-do list. Oh, I wrote down the name of a new person in church, okay, put them on my prayer list, or, something like that. So I have a digital inbox. Then I have a physical inbox. It's in my office. It's a literal box. It's got a lid on it because I hate seeing like stuff. So I just close it. But, people hand me a note or a business card or whatever. It goes into that box. And then during that weekly review, I'm processing all of the things in those 3 inboxes: email, Google Keep, and that physical inbox. And I'm asking myself the question, what do I need to do with these things? Do I need to do them right now? Sometimes it takes 10 seconds. You just do it. Yes is the reply to the email. No, or whatever. Sometimes you just delete it. Like, I'm not interested in this. I don't need this business card or whatever. Sometimes you delegate it. You ask somebody else to do it. And sometimes you delay it. You put it on the schedule of your task list and you say, okay, I'm going to do this later. All right, so inboxes. The second thing that I would say everybody's going to have to do is process those inboxes. I actually just talked about that. And then a third thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have that review time where you're asking yourself, where am I going? What am I doing? I've talked about that and constantly planning. But another thing you're going to have is you're going to have some kind of to-do list. So There's so many of them out there that are free and paid for and all of that. You just got to find one that works for you, that you like. I like Todoist. It's a free, well, there's a free version of it. The reason I like that one is because I can pick the day that I want it to be due. And then each morning when I'm starting my day, I just look at that list and kind of organize it in sequence, like, okay, this. But you're going to need some kind of to-do list. And then a thing that is often overlooked that I think a lot of people need is they need a project list. So a project list is like, here's my main responsibilities. Here's my main ministries. I have a big list of them. And when I'm doing that review each week, I'm asking myself the question, what are the things I need to do next for these projects that are in front of me? And then the last thing I would say, and this might have been better to say in the boundaries thing, but is to, in the system that you create, I would say I think it's important for you to develop some rules that you live by. So I mentioned my social media rules. Those would be great. Or in the morning I have rules, like part of what I have on my phone is a thing, this will probably be like worth your price of admission. I would encourage all of you to subscribe to a service called Freedom. What Freedom does, you pay a fee each year, and if then Freedom, you install it on your phone, you install it on your computer, and if you have a tablet, you install it there, install it on all your devices, and then you can preset times that you don't want to be able to get on the internet. And you tell Freedom when those times are going to be. So when I wake up in the morning, my alarm clock goes off. I get up at 5 o'clock. When my alarm clock goes off, I cannot get online on my phone. It's just really helpful because that will derail my day if I'm not careful. When I enter into my study time, I need my computer for that, but all I need is my Bible study software and my word processor. I don't need the Los Angeles Dodgers website. So what I tell it to do is you lock me out of, you can tell it which specific sites if you want that are distracting for you, like lock me out of these, give me access to Wikipedia because that's such a great study resource or whatever it is, and you keep those, but that app has saved me in a lot of ways from distraction. I just have like a hyperactive mind, so maybe like I need this more than you guys do, but Freedom is great. So having some rules, though, that you make are going to be important. So I think that's part of having a system. All right, so I've just said a ton. My hope and prayer, like I've talked about personal organization before to people, and I just always feel like this is more of a one-on-one conversation, to like coach you, like where are you at? Let's build you up. How can I help you? It's always hard doing a big workshop, but I hope these 6 principles have been helpful. Be goal and role oriented, do the important things, set boundaries, read a lot, constantly plan, and have a system, develop a system.